started. We always get started on time in our Security Thought Leadership webinars, and a very warm welcome to what is today our 50th Security Thought Leadership webinar. We've been here throughout the crisis, almost always on a Tuesday and Thursday, sometimes other days too, where we've been debating a topic of central importance to the security world. And the idea of thought leadership is that by critiquing what's going on today, we get a better type of security tomorrow. And those of you who've been on previous webinars will know how it works. We get expert panelists and we debate and we talk about the issues. And the topic today is one that's cropped up previously and I know is on many people's thoughts. The role of security association. Is it a failed resource or a fundamental vehicle for a better security sector? And you will have heard, if you've been on previous webinars, that on the one hand, we've got the view they've been an essential form of support, they've lobbied, they provide networking opportunities, they've represented us, and that's been a fundamental benefit. And there are those who are saying, wait a minute, we can't go on as we was before. Here's a time for change. Let's think differently. Let's get everyone to work together rather than against and be rivals. And let's have a single point of contact for a unified security sector. Well, today we'll debate those issues. Just to say once again, an important point, this is the 50th Security Thought Leadership webinar. At that point, there was supposed to be a bit of applause, but it didn't appear. Never mind. Thank you very much indeed to Team Software for their support. I'll tell you what's going to happen now. Our four panelists, I'm going to make sure that they each are going to introduce themselves, as is normal. Once the four have done that, I'm going to come back and ask them for their opening statement. Once I've done that, all four of them have spoken, I will then invite you to ask any questions you've got. So please use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. Get your questions in early and I will endeavour to come to you and get your question covered. That's the question and answer button at the bottom of the screen, not the chat. Question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. Get your questions in early. Without further ado then, let me introduce the panel, or rather, let me get them to introduce them first. So first of all, Liz, can you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you very much, Martin. Very pleased to be here and thank you for the invitation. My name is Liz Chamberlain and I am the Executive Director of the International Security Management Association, or ISMA. It is a global association of chief security officers from major companies around the world.
Liz, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Julio. Julio, you introduce yourself, please.
Hello, good morning from Buenos Aires, Argentina. I'm the president of Global Life Safety Alliance, a non-governmental organization that's established in Alexandria, close to our friend from ASS, and we are working to build a necklace all around the world.
Thank you very much indeed, Julio. To Guy, back in the United Kingdom. Guy.
Martin, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Yes, Guy Mathias, Chair of the Security Commonwealth. That doesn't mean that I've usurped Prince Charles from the General Commonwealth, but I think pertinent to today because certainly the Security Commonwealth having over 40 members and many of those members are associations that we're going to discuss.
Guy, thank you very much indeed. And finally, Peter, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Peter O'Neill. I'm the CEO of ASIS International. We're headquartered in Alexandria, Virginia, with an office in Brussels, staffed by a team of great folks there. It's a great pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
Peter, thank you very much indeed. Right, without further ado then, we'll get to our opening statements. This is where each of the panelists has 3 minutes to say what they want to say about this topic. So let's start off with Liz. Your opening statement, please, Liz.
Thank you, Martin. So relevance is a word that's frequently on my lips as an association executive. The concern about maintaining relevance as an association in any industry is not a new one. I don't ask, in the age of COVID, how do we remain relevant? Rather, I say, it's Thursday, how do we remain relevant? That being said, I do believe that security associations remain a fundamental vehicle for a better security sector, especially in times of crisis like the environment in which we currently find ourselves. Yes, the curtailment of the ability to meet in person has been a disappointment for ISMA and its members, but when we were last together in January, we grasped the imminent need to pivot to new ways to facilitate and support the ISMA network as our members led their companies through this crisis. And we did, standing up frequent member roundtables, weekly benchmarking, and real-time communication via Telegram group. And herein lies the inherent value and most important role of a security association, to support and facilitate an effective, engaged, and robust network so that our members can benchmark, collaborate, and find the resources they need. We can all offer webinars, but the value of an association is largely in the network that it provides. Further, anyone can have a LinkedIn profile and attempt to build a network from scratch, but we eliminate the need to do that by providing our constituents with immediate access to their peers in a trusted fashion. Associations must constantly assess how they provide value. COVID has simply been a catalyst to reassess our strategy and how we operate. Further, I don't believe that competition between security associations has gotten in the way of effective collaboration. Associations that have risen in our industry have done so out of a demand and a need. I don't believe that those elements can be artificially tamped down. We serve many different constituencies. If one global industry-wide association could effectively serve the needs of each and every constituent in the industry, presumably regionally based associations or those focused on specific roles in the sector would not survive. That being said, I do believe that there is room for more effective collaboration between associations on issues of industry-wide significance, like diversity and inclusion and promoting security as a business asset. We do not need to reinvent the wheel here when good work is being done in our fellow organizations. Further, security associations are enablers of progress. I believe one of our greatest roles is ensuring that we promote the value of corporate security and that is recognized as an asset at every level of the business. Too often, security is seen only as a cost center, making it ripe for cutbacks and redundancy in hard times. Indeed, I've seen the elimination of multiple CSO roles during this pandemic. To some extent, associations are guilty of navel gazing, where we focus too much on what's happening inside our own echo chambers at the expense of security's position in the wider business community. It is imperative to have one voice around this particular issue, security as an asset to the business. By ensuring the relevance and value of our constituents to their own companies and organizations, we can further cement the vitality and sustainability of the associations that serve them.
Liz, thank you very much indeed. Lots of good points there. We'll pick up on them and already some of our questioners are. Don't forget question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. Let's go back to Argentina there. And Julio, your opening statement, please.
Thank you very much. Well, Martin, it's a very pleasure for me. And of course, from Global Life Safety Alliance, we've found that associations retains a very important role in society. And so even the COVID prevents face-to-face events. And as people go to LinkedIn and other new activities, associations provide that kind of certification and prove that these professionals and organizations have the qualification and complies with standards required to be a member of the international arena. We feel that many times associations found competing for the budget, of course, of the different companies and professionals. But I think there are a wide spectrum to cooperate and to build a wider net all around the world. You know that universities like you are working in, as professional association, ASIS, and other colleagues, Isma and the other friends, it's very important to connect and to provide and to exchange the best practices, but not just on the corporate side. It's very important also to work to build a partnership with the state government agencies all around the world. You know that developing countries, for example, address the terrorism issue, and they have defined and clearly defined this crime. But in other developing countries, terrorism even is not a crime. So because it's a political issue. So we need to build a common language. We have to share all the best practices to define, to raise the bar for the regulations to provide a safer world. We need to work together and exchange all our knowledge and keep together to work against the organized crime. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Julio. So let's go over back to the United Kingdom. And Guy Mathias, your opening statement, please.
Thank you, Martin. Well, is it a force for good or outdated? What a great subject. Thank you, Martin and the team, for putting together such a compelling webinar to have the facility to discuss this subject. For me, I feel the key challenges of COVID-19 have highlighted that there is very much a need for our security associations, and that they therefore remain relevant. I think many have been an essential focus for that relevance, for best practice, for learning opportunities. I think both for me and representing the members within the Commonwealth and other bodies that I chair, there's been a real collective sense that the associations generally have provided immense mutual support, tremendous resilience, and have often also provided very often agile reference points. However, it would be churlish to suggest that all is well, and I welcome, therefore, as I have said, that this debate we're having today on the 50th Focus webinar. There is always room and scope for what we have, and I think this evolves for our respective membership bodies. To pick up earlier points already made, we should always question our relevance and what it is we can bring to the table. To the key questions, focusing today, have we outlived our usefulness? No, because I think many of our associations are and will remain relevant. And I will perhaps touch on this as we go through questions and answers. I think the competition is welcome. I think there are a lot of bodies out there, and I think we on the panel today are reflective of supposed competition. But I think it's good competition. And I think each association, each group, membership group, brings its own unique take on what it is representing and purporting to offer. I think we can do more to, though, reset in future what we are and how we work together. And you would expect me to say that as a collaborative chair for a collaborative body. I think the associations are the very route to progress. And I think if you take certain campaigns that have been launched in the UK recently about the image of frontline security, they are welcome, as is perhaps the perceptions campaign that we're currently running. And that's engendered many other debates in terms of how we approach the perception, not just of our frontline, but for managers and security and risk professionals generally across the global piece. I think the ability of associations has been evident, in particular for me, the creation of social media elements such as the instant WhatsApp groups that we've seen, particularly in the UK, which is really vital and key to moving forward and disseminate a very instant and real cascade of information. And there's been some tremendous advice and best practice shared there. I think to an earlier point made by Liz, I think our associations undoubtedly still have a role to play as enablers. They can and do remain relevant. I believe increasingly so, rather than less so, in a world which at present relies on the virtual mediums to actively function. If our associations can adapt and evolve, concluding, I feel that they still have a clear and distinct and professional role to play.
Guy, thank you very much indeed. And just to say to the audience, if you could use your question and answer button at the bottom of your screen, get your questions in early. We'll be coming to you after our final opening statement. Peter, your opening statement, please.
Hey, thank you. Good morning and good afternoon again. I won't repeat what Guy, Liz, and I think Julio said really well. I think Liz, you in particular really captured a lot of what it means to be an association person, right? We know in our profession that every day we question the value statement, the value proposition for members. We look constantly at what does relevance mean. COVID hasn't changed that discussion. I think, Liz, the point you made, it's maybe heightened the need to move faster, or associations don't always move as fast as some companies. But look, at the end of the day, associations both advance and connect the world in every profession, in every trade that we all know. And you need, without standards and guidelines, certification, without research, without good solid knowledge and education opportunities built around networking, to Liz Chamberlain's point, how does a profession or trade move forward? I think the answer to that question is they really can't without active people, active volunteers working to advance these professions. In this case, the security profession and industry. You wouldn't be a cohesive, globally operating body. So for me, Martin, I'll leave my comments by saying, to me, your question at the top of the hour is not an or, it's an and. COVID has not caused Liz or Guy or Julio or me not to think about relevance. We're always thinking about relevance. It's just caused us to think about it a little bit differently and look for different folks to collaborate with, different organizations to partner with. Competition is good. Pardon me, competition is good. And I think that's one of the points Liz made. And I think you see a lot of cooperation among and between the association groups, both the trade and the professional side in this space. So leave my comments there, maybe leave some more time for questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Peter. Well, let's come to our first question. And when we were putting this webinar together, by the way, we came up with some ideas, and independently, Michael Gibbs wrote to me and said to me, what about doing one on security associations? And because he did that, I said I'll give him the first question. So let me come to you.
He's a troublemaker.
Liz, the question is this. No one has successfully replaced face-to-face with online events. Is COVID last through 2021? Can associations survive the mass loss of conferences, registrations, exhibits, and sponsorship revenue? Can it be done, Liz?
So from my perspective, and I will speak from an ISBA perspective at this point, we thankfully don't budget conference revenue into our bottom line. If we have an excess on a conference, great, but most of them are budgeted to break even, frankly. So we had the very good fortune, even when we had to cancel all of our events this year, with the exception of the January meeting, that we didn't suffer a loss. We had no contracts outstanding in 2021. We have shifted a conference to that, but I think that for associations that rely on larger trade shows, and maybe Peter can speak more broadly to this, that it could absolutely be something that is going to be a big hindrance to them in the future. Again, not something that we've relied on. I'm more concerned about dues revenue, to be honest, as I start to consider how corporate budgets are going to constrict whether or not people are going to be able to travel if we do have conferences and the like. So there's so many things that are going to go into the physical face-to-face meetings. It's not just, can we travel to Vienna for this meeting? It's can my members get the budget to do it? Are they confident enough to do it? And so really it's going to hit us, I do believe, on all sides. And so I'll defer a little bit more to Peter on sort of the bigger trade show question, if you don't mind.
Okay, so let's come to Peter then, Peter, because obviously I suppose where an organisation is more dependent on events, this question has a particular poignancy. Peter, your thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, sure. And I think, Liz, you made all the great points I would have made as well. I think all membership organizations right now, whether they're trade or they're individual, so-called IMO, right, individual membership organization, we all have the same challenges that Liz mentioned around membership dues and what are these companies' travel policies? Are people, never mind, are people going to feel comfortable traveling? That's a whole other matter entirely, but will they have the budgets to travel and when? It's not a secret at ASIS, we rely on GSX for 56% of our net revenue. So it's the live event that we do. There are other live events that we do, ASIS Europe, for example. We rely on that for revenue, that event for revenue. So we've taken an 18-month look. I won't get into all the budget details in this because that's not the purpose of this call necessarily, but we have the wherewithal to withstand the next 2 or 3 years of what will be a challenge around live meetings. And we reported that out to our membership pretty broadly. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Let me come to Julia. Julia, this is such an important topic. Do you see that this being a barrier to you? Is it going to put the organisation in some sort of jeopardy without face-to-face meetings and uncertainty about membership dues?
I think thanks to technology, I think like now we are joining Zoom. Zoom has become a wide extent media. We rethink and we redesign our activities and the dynamics of our meetings. Of course, new challenges like research and investigations brings opportunities to the table and generates this kind of products. We need to afford the organizations to move forward, no, to finance and to afford all the organization's activities. So it's a good opportunity also to rethink and to redesign our way to connect and to keep connect all around the world.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Let me move on because I want to get to the next question. Guy, come to you first. Do you think, and of course, Guy, you're part of a representative group of different security associations, Guy. What's your sense from the group about the viability of surviving as they are, as opposed to making some sort of changes to get through? And I'm also interested what those changes might be, Guy.
I think you're right, it's an incredibly varied group we've got some pay to play, so there are some revenue considerations for some of them, and I think that is certainly vexing some of our members, and understandably so. I think generally the opportunities are that, in essence, those member groups, the same as the Commonwealth generally, would just have to be more creative in how it and they operate. I think there is a real need to think outside the box and adapt and evolve. I keep coming back to that, but it is essentially dealing with the chips as they've been dealt for us, all of us, in this particular year.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And that was inspired by a question from Andy Williams. Let me go to another question now. Perhaps I'll come to you first on this one, Peter. And it's from Martin Smith, who runs a similar sort of webinars to this, only focused on cybersecurity. And what he says, he gets the point, as we all do, about the common good. But the trouble is that many organizations are in fact operate as commercial organizations. Of course they do. I mean, and the question is, turf wars inevitably must exist. And when we talk about uniting the world and uniting the security sector, then clearly there's a barriers to associations being able to do that. Isn't there? Peter, your thoughts?
Why did you ask me this question first? Well, look, I think I would love to hear what my colleagues think here and what folks on the in the chat and the questions think, right? So at our base, we all cooperate. I think one of the points and the question that was made that we are also all commercial entities. What Liz Chamberlain's world and my world, we'd say no margin, no mission, right? We have to be able to make money, quote, be a commercial enterprise in order to pay for things that member dues and other revenues don't cover. So of course we're each commercial enterprises and we have to make money, quote unquote, in order to survive. Fundamental difference is that any money that these four organizations represented here, and I realize Guy represents a number of different organizations, but I'll just use the four here as an example. We all have to make some margin on some things, live events, digital events, certifications, standards guides, whatever they may be, in order to support the industry or professions that we're serving. Does that sometimes lead to lack of cooperation? Yeah, it does. I mean, there are some places where Liz and I, for example, would easily agree that thus and so is an opportunity for both ISMA and ASIS. And there'll be other places where we may say, you know, that's actually too close to the base. And so we're going to each maybe need to do our own thing, so to speak. ASIS has these conversations all the time. We've got a great relationship, for example, with SIA. Don and his board have been great to work with through this pandemic. You've seen the COVID pages that we've set up together, the partnership that we developed around that, around webinars, and so on and so forth. Because I think at the end of the day, every association exec on this call, we have to put our members first. And I think that those are a lot of times the conversations Liz and I have when we have them. What's in the best interest of the members? And then we figure out the commercial pieces. And that is absolutely true of any conversation I've had with any association peer, IACP, National Sheriff's Association, certainly ISMA, Cybersecurity Alliance, and on and on and on and on.
Thank you, Peter. Let me come to you, Liz. I mean, Liz, I don't think the problem is so much that you've got to make your way in the world. We get that, right? The problem is, Liz, is that when it leads to conflicting, too many standards, too many guidelines, so many different ways of doing very similar things. The idea that can get in the way of progress rather than cooperating. That's, I think, the nail on the head issue here. Liz, your thoughts?
Yeah, and I completely understand the perspective, especially on standards, which, to be honest, we don't do, because I do think we have to recognize that why would ISMA try to step in and do standards when ASIS has been doing it for 60 years and also, frankly, has the bandwidth to do more than we do. You know, I have a 3-person staff, including me, and, you know, we have to be able to understand and identify who is the best place to do certain things. And so while I totally agree with Peter that there have been things that we very frankly have discussed and said, we're probably both going to do this, you know, let's just deconflict where we can and figure out how best to serve the industry, because at a base level, I'm a small business that exists to serve my constituents. And, you know, of course I have to keep the lights on, but I do think that it's important to deconflict and find ways to work with each other. Like I said, to not reinvent the wheel. Peter's reached out to me about diversity and inclusion initiatives. You know, that's something we should all absolutely be collaborating on, and not saying, oh no, ISMA has to do its own diversity thing. And so I think that you have to find ways to keep the lights on, to support your team and your staff, while also making sure that you're not reinventing the wheel to the detriment of our broader industry, and that you're serving your constituents the best you can. And I think that's all any of us can do.
Yeah, and Martin, if I could just, can I just add something? Rick Mountfield put posted a chat that actually I think sums up what Liz and I are saying. He says, turf wars were personally driven. With the right people leading the way, organizations can and are collaborating. And I think that Liz and I know Rick, I know Don Erickson at SIA, you know, a lot of the other, you know, alphabet soup we could throw in here. We all have worked hard to not allow our own personalities, or say the personalities of our organization, if you will, because each organization takes on has a persona. We have worked very hard in the few 4 or almost 5 years I've been at ASIS, and I know Liz and Rick and others have worked longer than that, as Liz says, to deconflict, to not have it be that mine's got to be bigger than yours, that yours is smaller than mine, that I got this and you got that, and really to talk with one another on a level playing field. And I think Rick summed that up really well in his post.
Okay, I may come back to this. I'm going to go to Guy next, and then I'm going to come to Julio. Guy, I want to ask you this question. We accept that associations collaborate. We accept that they've got to serve their membership. This is not what I think the nail on the head issue is. The nail on the head issue is, if you look at the broader benefits of the security sector, it's difficult to speak with one voice when there are conflicting standards, when there are conflicting guidelines, when there are so many groups claiming to representing different groups and not coming together to work as one. Guy, you in the Security Commonwealth been trying to bring groups to work together as one. And I guess the honest truth is good progress, but slow progress. I mean, it hasn't united the security sector to the point where the world is looking to the Security Commonwealth as the voice of the security sector. Guy, I'm just trying to get to the realities of this collaboration bit here.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point and a fair question, Martin. I think it has been slow progress. I think it reflects the fact that the Commonwealth, even though it's been in existence now for a few years, was created at the behest with a concept that said it is a together organisation, hence the banner of Stronger Together. But it is difficult. We've heard Peter talk, and Liz has referenced the fact that we've got a number of bodies that are very much sorted out in terms of what they've got in play. And we've tried to move that on and say, okay, look, there are existing organisations, ACIS, Institute, etc., that have been in play for many, many years doing a fantastic job. Our idea is to essentially be that body that says we will facilitate, we will try and orchestrate, and we'll try and bring together those many diverse representative bodies that we have in play. But I won't pretend it's easy. I think in a world of today, if we were starting a conversation today, we probably would have one collective representative body, a commonwealth of sorts. But we don't. We have to deal with the pack of cards that we've got. And I think we generally do that. But yes, I accept the point that that progress may therefore be slow as we move through that. What we are going to try and do is continuously work towards getting people who are endorsing one another and building a future together and working stronger together in that play.
Okay, thank you. Julio, would you agree, Julio, that if we were if we were starting again, Julio, would you agree with Guy that we would design it differently? we would design it with a collaboration and representative voice at the heart of what's going on, as opposed to being an afterthought. Julio.
Yes, well, first of all, I would like just to say that Global Life Safety Line will be delighted to promote our colleagues, associations, materials, thought, leadership, and best practices, certifications like ASIS and other from our friends. I think it's very important in this moment to stop and to think that we sing in different tunes. We play in different tunes, very nice tunes, but we have to build an orchestra. We have to find out and promote the best of our colleagues and use that to expand our coverage and our services. We'll be better to work together. We'll enhance our capabilities, expand our services to our affiliates through building these relationships. We have to think like the medical doctors did in the past. I'm sure they create their own schools, and we have to exchange our practices to find out which is the best. I'm sure establishing these dialogues among these qualified institutions, we will build a better and safer world, and also partnership like we are doing, for example, with the organization from American states working today to identify the emergency communications infrastructure in the Americas. So we can also work together to partnership and to serve the states, and they are lower in the evolution because they have the parliaments, they have to approve the regulations, and many times from our organizations, we can provide this support to enhance the security at worldwide level.
Thank you. Julio, we'll come back to you, I'm sure, on some of these issues. Let me move on then. And I'm going to come to Peter first on this one. And Peter is a former panelist, actually, Dave Tyson, who I know you know very, very well. He's mentioned a really good point. In the commercial world, and we've been making reference today to the parallels in some instances with serving our stakeholders and obviously needing to make margins, has driven consolidation. The association was resisted this, he argues. Is there a time in the future when this becomes a possibility that we should look to see this as a positive and not as perhaps a disaster? Peter first, and I'll come to you, Liz.
And you're asking about consolidation of professional and trade associations in the industry space and the security.
Well, just looking at so the point is, in the commercial world, we've had consolidation. We're not seeing any type of consolidation of any sort in the association world, whichever form you want to use. And the question is, shouldn't we? Isn't that good? Isn't that a positive benefit of COVID potentially? Peter, your thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Look, I mean, traditionally in the association market, I'll call it pre-COVID. I think everything in life, what we've heard as pre, during, and post at some point, right? Pre-COVID, you just largely did not see the association space in general consolidate. And there are a lot of reasons for that. In fact, Julio touched on a few of them. Very frequently when you see, and some people would call this a fracturing or splintering of a profession or a trade association. In fact, I would call it something else. But you take the American Medical Association. 100 years ago, if you were a doctor, and Julio, you brought this up, right? You belonged to the American Medical Association. And over the years, specialties, became important, and people had to make a choice. Julio, if he was an orthopedic surgeon, he had to make a choice. Would he join the Global Society of Orthopedic Surgeons, and/or would he belong to the general, if you will, General Medical Association? And you've seen that in every profession, and you certainly see it in the security space. So that splintering is not uncommon. And I don't think, if there was no security association right now today, and someone tried to form one, in 10 years you would see a splintering. I just would make that observation to you. In terms of consolidation, I do think you'll see consolidation in the future. I think that budgets are largely under too much strain in general. And I think in the association space, you're going to see where before COVID, pre-COVID, most associations wouldn't consider that for a whole host of reasons. You're going to start to see more and more of that, I think, in the future.
In order to survive, Peter, or because that's seen as a different and better way of doing things?
I think it's an and, not an or.
Okay. Liz, let me come to you then. So the question is about the fact that there hasn't been much consolidation. Could COVID-19 drive that, and would it be a positive? Liz?
So I agree with Peter that fragmentation, I think that's a negative term just in and of itself. And so I don't think that it means, you know, necessarily, I mean, of course, some of these have fragmented because of personalities, as was pointed out earlier. But like I said before, I think that there's always going to be demand and need that arises in this industry. And you can't artificially say, you know, there's going to be this X huge security industry association and it's going to be the only one. Because to Peter's point, I was actually thinking earlier about law. It's a similar sort of thing where you have the big bar association, but then maybe you are a member of the one that specializes in IP security or sorry, IP law or whatever else. I don't think that you can artificially stop that process. Do I think that there will be consolidation in the association space as a result of COVID? I don't, because I don't think that unless it was wholly driven by a financial need, I think that Peter's points about sort of the reasons that we didn't do it before are still going to exist after the fact. And I do think that if we consolidated, you'd still see in 10 years, perhaps additional splinters, because again, I think it's a natural process that one can't put artificial barriers in front of.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Liz. I'm going to move on. I'll come to you first, Julio, to a different issue from Sean Wilson. And he's asked this point. Do you think there is a challenge, Julio, for organisations, for associations to remain relevant to the changing business and security world? I mean, we've heard on these webinars, the previous 49, all sorts of ways in which they've changed, far too many summaries. But clearly, business is changing, the nature of things is changing. Associations have to adapt, but as was said earlier, they can move slowly. Julio, your thoughts, is that going to be easy or is it going to be a challenge?
It's a challenge, and of course it's a big opportunity. You know that, for example, security was like, armor issue, but now with the COVID has shown that we have to interact with health and safety issues, and of course with the environment protection. So we are challenged just to update and to address the new challenges that the world has facing now with the COVID and in the future with the climate change as well.
Yeah, okay, thank you. We've had a previous webinar on climate change, and I agree that that point was made. Guy, I want to come to you on a question, and it's a question that I think has been on the thoughts of many people. And when you're out there in the world and you're trying to look at the security sector, and this great big thing called security sector, and you're not in security, you're confused. You're confused by standards. You're confused by the sheer complexity. Governments haven't got anyone to liaise with, so it lacks a voice. It lacks a sense of identity. And this gets in the way of professionalism, it gets in the way of progress, and it gets in the way of others understanding what security is about and able to present that sort of, this really matters. And I wonder really whether associations, for understandable reasons, and in fact, but exacerbate those differences and make it even more difficult to make the ultimate progress we need to make, which is not all the associations, certainly the one presented here today, doing excellent work to their members, but the broader issue of presenting the whole security sector. Guy, I'll come to you first, and then I'll come to Liz. Guy.
Yeah, it's we've got a diverse structure. Some of the chat has been reflecting that we've got a very wide-ranging sector in terms of what we do. I guess my response in the first instance would be, I think the associations are actually doing their best to promote that piece. But I think the pickup point for me, Martin, would be the professionalisation piece. In the boardroom, and people perhaps who've been privy to some of my thoughts before will understand my views about how you get the route to the executive suite or the C-suite. We don't do that very well in our professional sector. We're all professionals, we're all adapting to what we feel we're doing, but for me, it's still not essentially recognised. And that's my challenge to all of us as our organisations. We have to demonstrate to business, to the business world, that we are critiqued and are perceived in value as much as the lawyers of this world, as much as the IT experts, as much as the procurement gurus. And we don't have enough representation in those real high echelons of what we got. I've been privy to sit on boards by dint of circumstance. That would be my message to go out now in response to the question. My challenge to the associations is to carry on taking that forward, because it's proving very difficult to achieve that.
Okay, Guy, please, I said after Guy, I'd come to Liz, because Liz, you seem the perfect person to answer this question. I used the word professionalisation. Guy made the same point and built on it by mentioning lack of representation in the C-suite. This has been the holy grail and largely abysmal failure. Liz, would you agree, and do you see that as a major problem? Let's go there first, Liz.
So yes, I mean, this is a perennial issue, as you pointed out. This shows up on all of our conference agendas. Everyone wants to talk about the best way to make sure that security is represented at the board table, and there's not a magic bullet. And so I think that we see, certainly in my organization, you see a wide array of where a CSO sits in the corporate structure. And, you know, it's fascinating. You'll have, you know, one CSO who sits in facilities, which is relatively far down the chain, and then someone who's reporting to the COO. So there's no standardization of the professionalization of the CSO role. And I'm speaking to that only because it's the most senior role and the one that is most likely to be at the board table. But you know, Peter or Martin, you asked in your email about speaking with one voice. I think that's very hard across the security industry on most issues, but this one shouldn't be it. I think if there's anything that we can get behind, it's that the security department is an asset to the business. It's necessary to the business, and without it, you know, you don't have protection for your bottom line, for your people, for your assets. And so, if there was one thing I would say that these four associations and the broader industry association should get behind, it's that message.
But why is that not obvious, though, Liz?
Oh, well, I think it's a fundamental problem of security being seen as a cost center, right? You don't need insurance till you need it. You don't need security till you need it. And it's very easy to look at your balance sheet and go, oh, why are we spending so much money on this? What can they show? And the problem has always been one of metrics. It's very hard to show wins as a CSO, because it's very hard to tell them what you prevented. And so that's also a perennial discussion in the ISMA community, is how to show that value. And so it's very much about having business-minded individuals in those seats as well. Because if, as a security professional, you can't talk about why you're valuable to the business, you're never going to get any higher up the ladder to get to that table. And so I think that very often in the security industry, we get very focused on tactical and operational things, which are obviously necessary to support the business. We've seen a lot of discussion about that during COVID. But at the end of the day, if you're a senior security executive, if you want to be a senior security executive, you have to develop business acumen. And I think that that's something that perhaps was missing in earlier education tracks, you know, certification pieces. And so what we have is people, you know, who may have not embraced changes in the security industry over the past 15 years. And that's resulted in sort of pushing security down the importance, you know, the business chain of importance. So I think the failure is not at any one point in the industry, but I think that this is something that we need to coalesce around.
Okay, thank you. Let me come to Peter. Peter, we've got quite a few questions about on a similar issue about where there is a logic to collaborating, and maybe it's on access to the C-suite, promoting security globally as a sort of public benefit, an enhancer of business. Keith Nielsen says on professional qualifications, maybe there's a coming together possibility. Some of these, Peter, there are commercial reasons standing in the way, but where there isn't, perhaps, what's the barrier to saying, as a collective around the world, there's a united good in putting certain things forward that are perhaps less in the world of competition, and saying, let's unite behind those? What's the barrier to doing that?
I don't think there is a barrier to doing other than money. You just described what would amount to a $10 million PR campaign. You know, you'd have to get all the organizations to agree on the baseline messaging. That would be a challenge. each of us have maybe a different view. Each of our organizations perhaps have a bit of a different view. So you'd have a lot of work to do around getting the groups to be willing to coalesce around what I'm going to call messaging and images. And then you'd have to launch a campaign, and you would have to go hard at it. Liz brought up the value of what we used to call my last organization, the quote unquote value of the profession. At my last organization, we spent 5 years and I would say almost, let's see, probably $2.5 million quantifying through case studies the value, the literal value that industrial hygiene and related occupational health and safety professionals bring to the bottom line. Because as Liz pointed out, as is true with security, sometimes it's like insurance. You don't know you need it till you need it, and then all of a sudden you need it. They're not great. This profession, like a lot of professions that are related to security, there's not a lot of qualitative and or quantitative numbers you can get at, which is what people in the C-suite are looking for. And I spent a lot of time in the last organization I served for 15 years preparing us to be able to do that, and then launching different campaigns around it, career fair type campaigns through, in the US in particular, not globally in that particular case. It's very difficult. It's very layered. It's way more complicated than what it's made out to be, and it's extremely expensive. You know, we did a study with my former organization. We did an RFP, and we had, you know, responses from Porter, Novelli, you know, all the big global PR firms, and we were seeing price tags that we just, at that organization, we just couldn't afford, couldn't stomach. Now you talk about all the organizations coming together, and now you've got to get these messages through boards and through staff. Then people have to be willing to pony up their quote share of the money. Well, how will you do that? Is it based on size, scope, reach, etc.? So I know it sounds, maybe it sounds trite, but I think it's easier, much easier said than done. And then the last quick thing I'll say is not every organization represented here on this call, or even in the folks that are participating here, not every organization lobbies. In the United States of America, lobbying is, you know, we understand what that means. We have an opportunity to influence our government in a very different way than my friends in South America or in Europe or in Asia Pac. And so you get into potentially taking quote unquote global positions on things. Now you're talking about, you know, something much bigger. Last big thing I'll say is there's a lot of dialogue in the chat about standards and guidelines. ASIS has been a standards and guidelines developer for years. And to my knowledge of the history of it, and I can certainly stand corrected, you know, I don't think we were shamed in going to the table. I think years ago, management of ASIS, volunteer and staff management, saw standards and guidelines as a very important thing. If you develop a standard through an ISO or ANSI process, they take years. It's just the process. It's a way to make sure that whether it's an ANSI US specific or ISO global standard, it's a way to make sure that, I think to Julio's point earlier, all voices get heard. In order to do that, it takes time. You'll see ASIS in the coming probably 18 to 24 months begin to look at what I call a non-ANSI-like process, where we'll honor the ANSI process in spirit, but we won't necessarily perhaps follow a process where we have to go through every single hoop that ANSI or ISO would require. However, we still need to have, from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective, we've got to make sure we have all those voices that are needed at that respective table. And so that's very expensive, and it's very time consuming to do.
Peter, thank you for that. I appreciate your point. You articulated well some of the reasons why it hasn't happened. Julio, let me come to you because, okay, no one's saying it's easy. Of course, we understand that there are real issues, but we're just trying to sort of get, and I'm sort of bringing together the sort of wisdom from previous webinars. We've got to think differently, because the truth of the matter is security in a crisis begins to shine in some quarters. Although some organizations have got rid of their security departments, which tells a story on its own, I guess. But unless we begin to think differently, then some of these challenges that have been will never disappear. And unless we do that, there'll always be this role where security is not as good as it could be, nor perceived as good as it could be. Julio, your thoughts on how we might take it forward if you believe indeed we should? And I'll come to Guy afterwards.
Well, I do agree with all what has been said particularly with Peter, Guy, and Liz. I think we have to, there are two ways, I understand there are two ways. Besides, we have to start this dialogue and to increase and to make it become bigger, like you, Martin, are doing in this opportunity. You have become, you are moving forward with the OSPA initiative, for example, that is very important, just to set a standard, just to say what is recognized by the industry. And your partnership with ASIS, and we will be glad to also to disseminate all around the world. Something very important is inside what was mentioned, the organizations, the enterprise risk management approach that ASIS has developed, for example, just to mention an example of a colleagues, it's very important to show the value added for the organizations and establish a new approach, because when we talk about the internal rate of return, we don't have to put red in our faces. If not, we have to defend our added value to the operations and to the strategy. It's not just operations. What happened with our industry, that is an industry built on very proud and well-served people from security forces and armed forces. So their, many times the approach is very operational one. And we have to go for the business just to show how we add value to the operations inside the corporations. And also we have to provide to the politicians, to the political authorities, just a clear output of what a professional, of security professional is. And it's very important for them to recognize in us, in our professionals, and is one of our challenge, big challenge, working together as partners, what they can expect from a security professional. I think security, safety, health, environment, protection, all these new challenges to address the new challenges that the world is facing, it's very important to build together and using the best of each other. We have to build like will be a selection of the best around the world and to provide to the international, national, and local governments what we can do for improving the security and the welfare of our nations.
Julio, thank you very much indeed for that. Guys, I'm just going to come to you very quickly because, of course, in many ways, what you've been about with the Security Commonwealth is precisely this, building this unity of spirit and identifying things you can take forward, Guy. And I guess, do you relate to the problems that Peter has raised, and do you think that there are green shoots or there are ways forward? If I should be brief, Guy, I want to get one more question in.
Yeah, very much so. I agree. I think we've got to get to a point where we can engender our associations to get their membership to have proven commercial acumen, need to understand business, and that we've got to encourage our professionals in whatever association they're in. They have to adapt. They've got to develop those skill sets. And as Julio has just indicated, they've got to be seen to add value. We've got to get this message across. It's evolution and adaptation. Sounds very simple, but we need to get it into play, and we've got to encourage our associations to have that, I would argue, as a common message.
Yeah, you see, here's the point though, Guy. I mean, so one way forward would be to identify the common messages. I mean, I'm not in any way playing down what Peter says about some of the real issues, but has there been any real attempt to do that, Guy? Because that strikes me as at least a starting point, as a potential way for laying a common ground that could be for the long-term good. Guy?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's back to your point, it is slow by the nature of the beast. But I think some of the things we're trying to do, again, go back to the perceptions campaign, we're doing that at ground line, boots on the ground, frontline troops. If we can land that as part of an initiative and we can support that across the piece in the UK, I think it has a global imprint perspective, and we can take that message back to say, okay, what can we do, you know, with bodies like the Commonwealth to unify that message and get it out there and get a single sense of purpose, which is, I think, behind your question.
Yeah, it is. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Well, look, we're running out of time. What's running through these questions, if I can put one final question to each of the panel, almost your final comment each, please, and I'd ask you to be brief because we're running out of time, is I'll come to you first. Where are the opportunities for the security sector after all we've been through? I'll put the same question to all of you. Use your own words and your own focus. Liz, where are the opportunities for the security sector, given what role associations play from now on? Liz first, please.
Right, so I've been saying this since March, but I don't think we can ever let a good crisis pass us by. And I think we're very much in a similar situation to a post 9/11 world in terms of how people will look at security. And so this industry needs to take advantage of that. I think that we have seen a pendulum swing obviously back towards the importance of information or cybersecurity, and it's coming back our way at this point. And so to the extent that corporate security departments have the ear of senior leaders in their company, this is the time to get back in front of them, get budget for the things that you need, and start building back to security executives being at the table. And associations, you know, I totally agree with Peter that it's very hard to coalesce and get us to one particular message around any particular thing. And so I don't downplay the obvious barriers to doing that. But I think the most important thing for survival as associations in this industry is survival of our constituents. And so it's very important for those men and women to continue to be able to have seats at the important tables and be considered senior executives at the very top level.
Liz, thank you very much indeed. Julio, come to you next. Very same question. Big opportunities going forward. Very briefly, please, we're running out of time.
Yes, I think the Sustainable Development Objectives after that is addressed by United Nations after the COVID will cause a really huge impact on the world economy. So poverty will increase a lot, and so we will have to help to develop, to define opportunities for our colleagues and our professions and our associations to address these challenges to help to build a better and safer world.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Got that note down. Thank you very much indeed. Guy, your final thoughts on this, please.
Yeah, I think now's definitely the time to build on the situation as it is. I think I would argue that there is a real argument to put together corporate security and risk. I would say that, wouldn't I? Because I've made that leap personally. I'm seeing it increasingly across the piece. I think we have to be seen to provide real value as organisations and associations. And we've now got to build that really cohesive identity, bring those corporate light benefits into play, give access to people within our associations so that we've got access to peers, potential partners, suppliers and clients. Bring those benefits in relation to learning, sharing and networking, and keep giving them the voice and access within what is a very diverse industry sector.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Let me give me the final comment to you, Peter.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks again for having me here today, Martin. I think my colleagues here summed up a lot of it. I would finish by saying associations advance the world. I don't care what the profession is, what the trade is, associations advance the world. I think specifically to the security profession and industry, there's a lot of room for cooperation around research, around standards, around guidelines, around certification, and around the dissemination of knowledge and information and learning opportunities for our respective members. Sometimes we'll cooperate and sometimes we won't for whatever the reasons may be. But I think associations are more important and more relevant now than ever.
Peter, that's a fantastic comment to finish on. Panel, thank you very much indeed for your insights. That was absolutely fantastic. And so many questions, so many issues, so much chat. What the panel don't know actually is that when we started thinking about this subject, we worked with various people to come up with what would be the 4 best associations to write and who should we write to. And we wrote to all four, and all four said yes. So many thanks to all four of you for that.
You can't tell Martin Gill no, right, Liz?
Thank you very much indeed. I appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
Just very, very quickly then, this is just to say this was our 50th. So really good to have you all on that. Thank you once again to Team Software for their sponsorship. Just to remind you, when we're talking about outstanding performance, and thank you very much indeed, Julio, for mentioning this, although I have to say all the panelists have been very supportive of the OSPAs, and Guy's actually a judge on the UK OSPAs. Nominations still open in the UK, in Romania and Germany, and award ceremonies are coming up again. In the United States, on the 25th of September at GSX, the Kenyan OSPAs on the 10th of November at Security Expo, and Benelux on the 24th of November at ASMC Congress. So they're all in line. So once again, thank you very much indeed to all of you. I'm away for a couple of weeks on my annual leave, but we've got stand-in chairs to take on the organisation every Tuesday and Thursday. And next Tuesday, it's on our private military companies part of the security sector. Why are they different? Are they? Please join Dr. Glenn Kitteringham for that. Until I see you again, which will be in a couple of weeks' time, do stay safe and make sure wherever you are in the world, you not only stay safe, you get ready for more thought leadership. It's the way we begin to change the world. Thank you, everybody, and take care.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers, Martin.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, folks.